I put out a version of this video about 3 weeks ago where I discussed one of Jordan Peterson's most famous claims, that the concept of chaos is symbolically feminine. It was up for about 2 hours before I decided to take it down. Though it generally got positive reception, there were people leaving some, what I view to be, legitimate criticism. I felt that it would be better for people who are both fans and detractors of Jordan Peterson to hear me respond to these criticisms directly. I like to make sure that both sides feel heard and respected, because then people are more likely to believe me when I say that I'm approaching the subject as objectively as I can. In honor of that fact, I also intend to do a follow-up video to this one where I respond to the criticisms people leave in this video's comment section, so stay tuned for that. Today, I will be laying out a modified version of my original argument, one that incorporates that aforementioned criticism. Then, towards the end of the video, I will respond directly to a couple of critical comments that were left on that original video. Now, let's get started. When some people hear this claim that chaos is symbolically feminine, they think that Peterson is equating femininity or women with negative qualities, that women are chaotic or bad in some way. They often back this up by pointing out the subtitle of Peterson's second book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. If this was what Peterson was saying, then I wouldn't give him the time of day. I don't have any patience for legitimate sexism or misogyny. With that said, I don't believe Peterson's equating of chaos with feminine bears any sexist or misogynist undertones on his part. What a lot of these people seem to be ignorant of is the metaphysical and psychological meaning of the word chaos. It is within the history of religion and psychology that Peterson's conception of the word chaos becomes not only clear, but also completely innocuous. To illustrate my point, I will cite two primary sources, both of which are a part of a list of recommended books on Peterson's website. One is The Great Mother by Erich Neumann, and the other is The Forge and the Crucible by Mircea Eliade. The Great Mother provides a thorough history of female gods and feminine symbolism from the Stone Age onto the present. The Forge and the Crucible does the same thing, but also in regards to masculine symbolism and with a greater focus on alchemy. One thing that both books attempt to do is investigate the psychological reasons behind feminine symbolism, why our cultures represented their goddesses in the ways they did. For this video, I intend to explain what motivated not only our culture, but various ancient cultures to equivocate femininity with chaos. But before we get to the equating of chaos with femininity, I'd like to be clear about what I and Peterson are referring to when talking about chaos. Of course, there is the common definition of chaos, which, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is a state of utter confusion. If we were just going with that definition when considering Peterson's claim that chaos is symbolically feminine, then I think the case that Peterson is a misogynist or sexist would be pretty much true. However, chaos is more than just a descriptor of a bad situation. Chaos, as I just said, is also a metaphysical concept, one that actually can be understood as something neutral or positive, rather than negative. The easiest way of understanding this is through the yin-yang symbol. This symbol is one of humanity's oldest attempts at trying to describe the way the universe works. In the minds of the ancient Chinese who originated this symbol, all aspects of the universe were variations of the two forces displayed in this symbol. The white represents order, and the black represents chaos. Many people in the West might be inclined to ascribe the concept of good to the white and bad to the black, but that's not at all the right way of understanding it. Instead, the white and the black contain equal amounts of good and bad. They may be opposite to one another, but they are both fundamentally necessary in order for the universe to exist. It would be like having light without darkness, which is another dualism that one could project onto the yin-yang symbol, one of many. Most importantly, for the purposes of this discussion, I must inform you that the dualism of masculine and feminine are also projected onto the yin-yang symbol. Just like light and darkness, or chaos and order, the masculine and feminine are equal forces of nature that influence the makeup of the universe. They are opposite, but equal. They have negative qualities, but equally as many positive qualities. With that said, some might ask why femininity is attributed to chaos and masculinity to order. Also, despite what I said about chaos and order being equally good and bad, some might also ask how order could end up being equally as bad as chaos. In order to answer these questions, I will start by answering an even deeper question. How did these categories originate? Well, they're very ancient ideas. They existed long before science, long before people truly understood how the world functioned. In order for our primordial ancestors to have made sense of the world around them, about why the world is the way it is and what humanity's purpose is, they had to invent imperfect categories to make sense of things. In order to make firm categories that everybody could agree on, one would need to ask what is certain about the world around us. Well, there's day and night, earth and sky, life and death, and also male and female. Another thing that is certain is that the females are the ones that produce life, that produce children. At some point, a pressing thought dawned on one of our ancestors. What gave life to the world? How did the universe come to be? In order to make sense of this, humans created imperfect categories and then projected them on everything. In the case of life's origin, ancient societies conceived of a great mother goddess. Just as females give birth to children, the great goddess gave birth to life itself. According to Erich Neumann, figures of this great mother goddess were produced in the earliest periods of human history, back in the Stone Age. These 4 pictures depict the great mother goddess, thought to be produced anywhere between 20,000 and 12,000 years ago. These are, apparently, 4 of about only 60 Stone Age sculptures known to us, of which there are 55 female figures and only 5 male figures. These particular figures were found in France, in the entrances of caves devoted to a magical hunt cult. The goddess, this makes clear, stood at the center of the group life enacted in these caves. What this suggests is the dominance of the matriarchal, regardless whether and to what extent the male, e.g. the hunter group, seized power over the woman in this epoch. This makes sense because if you want to ensure the prolonging of one's life, as well as a number of beasts to hunt, kill, and eat, you want to please the goddess that produced and produces that life. Following the invention of the Great Mother Goddess, the inevitable question arises: where did the Great Mother Goddess come from? This invokes other questions too, like where did the universe itself come from? The first attempts to understand such a question were made around the same period. Neumann cites the most famous symbol of the universe's origin, one that originated in Egypt around the 14th century BC. This is the symbol of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. What you see here is the earliest known depiction of the Ouroboros. This was on one of the shrines enclosing the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun. There is a complicated history regarding the Ouroboros in Egypt in that it represents the union of Osiris and Ra in the underworld, but for the purposes of this video, I will focus on the symbol's psychological importance. As I have demonstrated in many other videos on this channel, the Ouroboros is humanity's attempt at depicting what the universe looked like before it came into being, when all the opposites of life were united in one seed. Before there were things like day and night, earth and sky, male and female, and chaos and order. The unity of life and death is also evident with, as I said, the snake somehow remaining alive while perpetually killing itself. Like the creators of the Great Mother Goddess, the creators of the Ouroboros symbol were trying to make sense of their origins and were forced to use imperfect human categories. In trying to picture the origin of the universe, I imagine our ancestors did the same thing that a lot of us do. We picture a black void, pure nothingness, pure chaos. This chaos is the source of life, so it has a positive, creative element. Yet, it is from the unknown, threatening darkness that snakes would jump out and attack. And to use the words of Jordan Peterson, snakes were hell on our primordial ancestors. So it also has a negative element. With all these factors in mind, it makes psychological sense to describe that formless chaos, brimming with both life and death, as a snake eating its own tail. It also makes sense, if we're using human categories, to ascribe a feminine quality to that chaos. If that formless blackness is the source of all life, one can conceptualize that in human terms. That formless blackness is the cosmic womb, and only biological females have wombs. Now, some might say this contradicts what I just said, because the Ouroboros is the unity of all opposites, including male and female, which would make chaos both feminine and masculine. This is true, but herein lies the problem of trying to envision what the world looked like before it came into being. The Ouroboros isn't the only depiction. In Christianity, for instance, there was the formless chaos, and then God made order out of that chaos. God is the Father, masculine, and the chaos is the cosmic womb, feminine. One cannot say definitively whether the origins of the earth began with something like the Ouroboros seed, or with an ordering principle acting on the chaos. It is something the human mind has difficulty picturing because it transcends our consciousness. Now, of course, this analysis of the Ouroboros symbol isn't based in hard data, but in the assumptions of archaeologists, historians, and psychoanalysts like Neumann. However, these assumptions are backed up when we look at the evolution of mythology throughout history. For example, Neumann suggests that the Ouroboros totality also appears as a symbol of the united primordial parents from whom the figures of the Great Father and the Great Mother later crystallized out. We see two great examples of this from Mesopotamian myth and, again, from Egyptian myth. The Mesopotamian myth I'm about to cite should be familiar to most hardcore fans of Jordan Peterson, the myth of Marduk and Tiamat. Tiamat was the feminine dragon of chaos, an Ouroboros snake, if you will. When Marduk, representing the masculine, defeated this dragon of chaos, he formed the heavens and the earth from her body. Once again, Tiamat, the Ouroboros dragon, has both positive and negative qualities. It is a terrifying monster, a snake emerging from the darkness, but it is also the source of all life in the universe. Tiamat is not only evil, she is also the generative cave womb of the Great Mother, whose Mesopotamian equivalent would likely be Ishtar, also known as Inanna. In Egyptian myth, there are the characters of Nun and Nunet, who represent the unity of masculine and feminine in the primordial waters. Primordial waters is another term for the formless chaos. What is also interesting is that the Egyptians referred to Nunet, the feminine counterpart, as the goddess of snakes. How about that? Now again, we deal with the problems of envisaging the universe before it came into being. For example, one might ask how Marduk came to exist before he created the heavens and the earth from Tiamat's body. Where did Nun and Nunet come from? And if they were the primordial waters, why did they have to be represented as humanoids? In all of these cases, humans are trying to project their mortal categories onto transcendent concepts. Clearly, there is no singular canonical view, but what one can do is look at these different myths and define patterns. One consistent pattern, as determined by Neumann, is that nearly all the early and primitive documents trace the origin of the world and of man to the darkness, the great round, the goddess. Whether, as in countless myths, the source of all life is the primordial ocean, or whether it is earth or heaven, these sources have one thing in common: darkness. And with our imperfect human categories, there is a tendency to project a feminine characteristic onto that darkness. For it is from the darkness, the cosmic womb, the womb of the great goddess, that all things emerge. Mircea Eliade's book, The Forge and the Crucible, presents several more examples of human beings projecting gendered categories onto other things. Speaking of Mesopotamia, the most famous myth to emerge from that society was the Enuma Elish. Eliade cites an analysis of this text from a scholar named Stephen Langdon, who notes that the sacred rivers of Mesopotamia were supposed to have their source in the generative organ of the great goddess. The source of rivers was indeed considered as the vagina of the earth. In Babylonian, the term signifies both source of a river and vagina. The Mesopotamians also employed the terms male and female in their classification of vegetable species, but this classification took into account the apparent morphological criteria, e.g., resemblances to human genitalia. In European metallurgical terminology, the kiln, where enameling material was smelted, was designated by the name of matrix or maternal bosom, muttershas. In Vedic India, fire itself was looked upon as the result, the progeny, of a sexual union. It was born as a result of the to and fro motion, compared to copulation of a stick, representing the male organ, in a notch made in a piece of wood, female organ. And to conclude, there are the myths of the Zunis. Quote, according to the Zuni myths, for example, primitive humanity was born in the deepest of the four Chthonian cavern wombs. Guided by mythical twins, humans climb from one of these wombs to another until they reach the Earth's surface. In this kind of myth, the image of the Earth corresponds exactly to that of the mother, and this anthropogeny is presented in terms of ontogeny. The formation of the embryo and childbirth repeat the primeval fact of the birth of humanity, looked upon as an emergence from the deepest Chthonian cavern matrix. And this, of course, echoes what Neumann said about Tiamat, who was the generative cave womb of the Great Mother. All of this demonstrates an ancient human tendency to project gendered terms onto the world. The association of the feminine with chaos goes back tens of thousands of years, though it has its negative element because chaos is dark and threatening things come out of the darkness. It almost always has its positive element, in that it is the source of all life. It is never exclusively negative, as so many progressive journalists might have you believe. There is a long human tradition of reverence for the feminine principle, regardless of its associations to the dark chaos. Not only that, there is a long tradition of projecting human categories onto the natural world, and with those projections, one again sees reverence instead of sexist stereotyping. This is the chaos that Jordan Peterson references, one that is both positive and negative. Those positive and negative elements are also reflected in Peterson's conception of order. Though sometimes we need an antidote to that chaos when its negative excesses become too great, we nonetheless require the chaos for not only its positive life-giving power, but all the other positive feminine qualities that reside within. Most of all, we need it when things become too ordered, when the masculine principle takes over. When this happens, things become too rigid and inflexible. There is no room for improvement. When a state of order, say a human society, is unwilling to adapt to new and sometimes dangerous circumstances, those societies will collapse under the weight of tyranny. It is only by acknowledging and respecting the opposite, the chaos and all the positive things it contains, that order can learn, evolve, and take on a new skin. Before I conclude, I want to remind you that I will be doing another video where I respond to people's comments on this video. I hope that by saying that, those who oppose Peterson will actually put thought into their criticisms. I hope that they will actually listen to what I said and not just leave casually contemptuous comments. For instance, on my original video, somebody commented, "Ah, the misogynist, 6 likes. This really irritates me because if they took the time to listen up to the minute 50 mark of the original video, they would have heard me say that misogyny is wrong and stupid, and that if Peterson were a misogynist or sexist, then I would condemn him in the most vociferous terms. I do not have the time nor inclination to listen to people that treat others differently based on immutable characteristics, be it race, sex, gender, those who are differently abled, or whatever. When someone leaves a comment like this, they are implying that a defense of Peterson is a defense of someone who does hate people based on their immutable characteristics. To this person who wrote this comment, and the 6 people who liked it, I implore you to actually direct your hatred of misogyny at actual misogynists. That way, actual misogyny can be rooted out of our society at a faster and more efficient pace. Finally, I want to briefly address one concern that people had about the chaos and order duality. Some feel that by ascribing gender to these principles, things might become too rigid, that it might not evolve just as order needs to evolve in accordance with the changing times. I think this is actually true. I think there is potential for these metaphysical concepts to be misused, that some people might try to reinforce archaic and sometimes harmful gender roles. In order to solve this problem, we shouldn't cling to these concepts too tightly. We should allow them to evolve in accordance with the times, but we should also be careful to not dispense with them entirely. I look forward to reading and responding to valid criticisms of the chaos and order symbolism in my follow-up video. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like. Please do that, it's free and doesn't cost anything. Plus, it helps tell the YouTube algorithm that this content is worth watching. So yeah, please hit the like button. Also, if you want to see more content like this, centering around Jordan Peterson, psychology, and history, please consider supporting me on Patreon. There are 6 different tiers with multiple rewards to enjoy. I'll put a link to my Patreon in the description box below. Thank you for your time, and until my next video, remember to stay yellow.